Emily's hoping, yeah, good. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We're hoping to be able to have some good conversation tonight about where we are with the budget for FY26. Emily's making a recording of what we're talking about tonight so that we're able to share that with some folks who weren't available at this particular time or for whom it would be useful. We have three slides, not counting the cover slide that Emily's going to manage to put on this screen for everybody to share shortly. And they are meant to just give us a way into a kind of common language tonight. And I would refer you to all the materials that are on our budget page that provide backup for some of the things that we're talking about in case people haven't been able to see the board meetings as they've unfolded or attend, in that respect. So this is meant as kind of a distillation. While Emily's getting the slides ready, what I can say, thanks, Emily, is that this week the board got the first full draft of the budget and its associated presentation on Monday, the 6th. And this week, between now and next Monday, is really it's a listening week for us, to determine, where is our community as a whole? Where are our taxpayers? Where are our parents? Where are our licensed and unlicensed staff and our students relative to all the things that are inherent in this budget? And so this meeting might be timed a little differently from how it's timed in the past. It's meant to mirror the meeting that we had in October, where we asked community feedback ahead of the budget process to make sure we understood what to prioritize. And this is meant as an opportunity for the community to just provide some information, ask some questions if there are things that we haven't thought about or that we need to be thinking about as we're finalizing things for the board on Monday. This is a good time to express that. We have staff opportunities that are separate from this one. We had a large online version that looks a little bit like this the Tuesday. And there are a number of staff conversations and leadership conversations that are going on inside our system. So the intent for tonight is that this is really for people who are not necessarily employed by the district, but are a deep stakeholder, for the important work that we do with students, to just give their insights and let us know what it is that we need to take into consideration or what you appreciate about we have taken into consideration as we've built this. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of points to give us a way in. And then there is a chat function. I see it looks like, we have probably more participants than we can manage with some hand raising. So it might be helpful to, as we get going, put a question into the chat, and then I'll read the question, I'll respond to the question, and then the person who put the question in can have a follow-up if that's helpful. This meeting is scheduled to go an hour, and so we'll kind of see where we are at the end of that and what we need from there. This budget, as the first slide that you see indicates, deeply prioritizes two things. The first is our students in terms of where they are in really thinking about a post-pandemic era and what our system needs to be doing and thinking about in order to support both their academic success and their ability to succeed well, regardless of their background or their perspectives on life in a community that prioritizes belonging. So you'll see that those things which are contained in the strategic plan that the board approved a little over a year ago are really the cornerstones of the spending plan that we have put forward with the board. And the last slide in this presentation is kind of a financial recap. So for those that are particularly interested in those points, in two more slides, we'll get to those. Essentially, this budget reflects principal and community design strategies that relate to student experience and student performance. If you're a community member thinking about how will this make a difference for kids, I think the thing I would share about that is that kids should be experiencing more adults and the effects of greater professional development on particularly what their math and literacy instruction looks like, but also what their general instruction looks like related to our commitment to inquiry-based learning and transdisciplinary unit development and things of that nature. So this should make a great deal of difference for kids relative to what they're experiencing in their first year instruction, which is one of the goals of this budget cycle. There's also an attention to the equity work that's laid out in the strategic plan, which is also available on our website, and operationalizing that so that good plans don't stay good plans, but actually are going into a project management cycle where we're beginning to develop some key indicators of work that's really important to us, both with communities that have been historically marginalized, but also in the way our whole community responds, the way that students respond to adults, the way adults respond to students, the way adults respond to internal adults and external adults, and what all that looks like. So all of that is deep work ahead of us, and this plan prioritizes that work and moving it forward. It also prioritizes additional pathways to graduation for more of our students, which is work that the high school is featuring. And it gives them a lot of fuel to really begin to pull some things together that their teams have a lot of positive energy around and good planning around and need resources to be able to carry out. So that's exciting. Go ahead, Emily. Let's take a look at slide number 2. The way we built the budget this year was very different. And you may have seen that if you have tuned in to any of the board meetings or checked the website or looked at various presentations or read the Addison Independent relative to how we've gone about that. It was the board's goal to be sure to allocate resources in this year in an equitable way and really think about that differently. That was a goal that was discussed with me as I was applying for the position just over a year ago, and when we worked hard to bring to life. We restructured the way we think about funding into 7 blocks to increase financial transparency. And we also built a budget that includes every single spent dollar. Which is not traditionally how budgets are often built. Often the general ed dollars are what the board and the public see most, and grant dollars, which vary a little bit in strategy and in amount, and they're a bit more of a dynamic part of the budget. Those are often held separately. In this budget, in order to ensure that we have a level of transparency that's appropriate to hold the public trust, and in concert with equity-based budgeting principles, we needed to make sure that we are building a budget that shows everything and categorizes things in a way that feels real to people. And so we've done that and looked at things differently. We've also implemented some things uniformly and some things, meaning equally, and some things equitably. So this budget, which is heavily driven by board policy, implements a D6 across the district very intentionally for the first time. Many of the reallocation of some classroom positions, which right now are in play, but for next year aren't necessarily, relates to coming into alignment with class sizes that are at least 10 in all of our schools, including the high school, except where not necessarily appropriate. So for those of you that don't necessarily follow board policy, that's available on our website too. And the D6 policy is the class size policy. And so that's been an important part of our conversation. It's also an important part of the state conversation and what many assume will be discussed widely at the legislature. probably with the size of 15 in mind, as the state determines how best to think about financial feasibility without hopefully losing the things that Vermonters have come to know as high quality in schools. Another thing that's important here is in our process is that we really started from a strategy that is different from an index-based budget strategy, which is more commonly used, where you take your existing programs and decide, should we add 2% or 3%? What's affordable? What might that look like? And that's a normal way of doing business. What we did is something that's often done, let's say every 3 to 5 years, where you take all the furniture out of the house and put it on the lawn, and then you determine, what do you need? You put that back in, and you decide, well, what room do we really need it in? Maybe a lamp used to be in the living room, and now where we really want it is the den, based on other decisions we're making. But it's basically a process where you come all the way to zero, and you build up from there, which helps in that it ensures that past inequities aren't carried forward. And it also helps to make sure in times of particular fiscal prudence, which I think all of us would agree we're in right now, we're ensuring that we're presenting a spending plan that relates to what we really specifically need, and why we need that. And we've reviewed all of those pieces. And I just want to make a public appreciation for our Director of Finance and Operations, Matt Corrente, who really has led the work of going through line by line to determine what that looks like. This budget draft that we presented to the board includes an FTE reduction of 9.4. And in order to only have that and meet the feasibility target the board has asked, Matt really went through and combed non-personnel expenses in an exhaustive way, which is really work that I've appreciated greatly, and I just want to make sure the community knows that that's been done behind the scenes. We have freed up about $2.2 million that from our furniture work we have reinvested into the school district in different ways. And we're working with our licensed and unlicensed staff to create some positions that are instructional specialists who are licensed teachers who have strong math pedagogy, maybe because it's been an area of interest or because they've had the opportunity to have an accelerated amount of professional development, who can be on the ground with classroom teachers that hold the more traditional responsibilities that classroom teachers hold, working side by side with them, with students, modeling and implementing the best of what we can get our hands on relative to practices that will move students forward in our post-pandemic world back into a place where strong math and literacy achievement feels accessible for all kids. And the board's strategic plan goal at the end of this plan in 2029 is that 80% of our kids at minimum across the district are meeting the standard in math and literacy instruction in particular, because those are such indicators of future success in our society as it is currently. So in order to do that, this reinvestment, it really represents a way forward in probably an accelerated catch-up form to be able to get us off on that right foot. It's probably a 3-year project in order for us to be able to really see some substantial difference in both our state and local indicators. But it's a way to be able to change some of the conversations that we're having across our classrooms, particularly in our K-8 classrooms. The high school, their reinvestment funds are related to flexible pathway creation, which is directly related to their graduation data. And the board's target there that we're working toward is 90%, although 100% is something that is operationalized, in every conversation I'm a part of in terms of where we'd like to be related to kids having strong pathways to graduation. And another important part of this budget is that unless the legislature changes some of the pieces of the educational funding formulas that are currently in place, that have been double and triple checked, this budget actually lowers taxes in every ACSD town. Now we, as many of you know, of course, we're not in control of that. We're in control of presenting to the budget a spending plan that we think is good for kids and reasonable, and represents prudent operations in compliance with state and federal regulations and established board policy. The way Vermont's taxes and are developed is not what was in our control. However, we owe the taxpayers our best guess, and I think particularly in this year, our best attempt at trying to provide some meaningful tax relief, and not at the expense of our students, but in every way we can to provide meaningful tax relief. And so this budget does that. I think the last slide we have gives some of the top level numbers of that. So it shows you the top line for FY25. That was the budget that was approved last year in March on the first try, thanks to the generosity of the communities that we have in Addison Central. Board asked us to look at a 2% top line target, and we have. There's the amount that represents that. The fund balance for us has been taken out of that amount, and that 50,318,000 and change is what those of you who are following along at the board meeting saw as the spending plan draft that we brought to the board on Monday night. So it's important maybe for the community to understand that any fund balance which would come from the FY24 audited surplus, we should have anywhere between 2 and 4% of our budget unspent, just for prudent financial management. This budget does not include applying any of that. The board will be able to work through a decision about how it wants to recommend that that's handled in its upcoming meeting on Monday. So we took that off the top and made sure that we're only working with dollars that are current dollars. We're not applying any past surplus work to that, at this time. So essentially, you can see the education spending dollars are reduced in the upcoming year from the number that was proposed for FY25 and we're currently working with. That means, for those that don't follow this on a day-to-day basis, that we will be drawing down fewer dollars from the Ed Fund than we drew down last year as we submit our numbers to the state, should this budget be the budget that the voters would approve. So you can see our education spending projection is to decrease by 1.78%. That isn't only because our spending plan meets the board's feasibility target. It also is, we're a little lucky in that our weighted pupils, the way that the state counts them, have gone up quite a bit. We're getting kind of full credit for, the number of students that we have, who might be with families who are struggling economically or who are multilingual, or our older students. We have a larger number of older students in our district that are more expensive to educate. They go to the Career Center, they do other things than we do younger students. So those weighted counts have worked out in our favor, and that really helps with the way that we're able to put together a spending plan that has a favorable education spending result in the end. And what we anticipate to be true is that the year-to-year change in the district tax rate that works with the education spending is 26%. And the good news about that is that it should go down by 26%. Now that depends on the town that you live in and a number of other pieces of the calculation that are even further from our control. But Matt has put together a slide that he showed the other night that maybe Emily, you could just pop up here. That sort of shows the way in which we might anticipate that fleshing out in the different towns. Those percentages may change, a point or two here or there by the time we finish with our budget process, but they likely won't change too much unless the legislature makes substantive changes in the formulas and all of those other things that we're not in charge of. So essentially, this is a budget that represents first full year of implementation of our strategic plan. It addresses head-on our need to move into a post-pandemic era carefully and responsibly, but deliberately, and creating more opportunities for students, particularly, at the high school level, to make sure that everybody's having equitable access to strong pathways for graduation. And it provides needed and tax relief for our taxpayers who, we heard that loud and clear when we were getting input in October. And so hopefully the way that this is working itself out feels like meaningful relief. As I said, we're interested in listening tonight and responding to questions or suggestions that the community might have. And so that's the purpose of tonight. So I'm going to stop talking as a whole and just open the forum for conversation. There are 27 people on this recording for those who aren't necessarily seeing all participants. So it is good to go ahead and just put a question in the chat that I can read and respond to, and then I'm happy to take a follow-up on if that's useful. Okay, Linda, thank you for being first. Your question is, if I'm reading it correctly, is my understanding correct that the guidance counselor position will be reduced from 5 days to 1.5 days? And you have a comment to follow up. Great. So that's actually a helpful conversation to cover. So thank you for that. In the process of determining, sort of equitable access to services across schools, one of the things that we did has actually been done periodically before in Addison Central, just not for a little while, is we looked at the way that shared staff are allocated, particularly among our smaller schools, and came back to a place of allocating those relative to either enrollment or a number of classrooms, depending upon the nature of the service. And in doing so, the guidance counselor position is something that at Bridport that had a 1.0 is reduced there. What's interesting to me about that in particular is that once you start to find out what is it that the guidance counselor does, on a full-time basis, in Bridport, what would possibly be missing if that whole FTE wasn't there, regardless of whether it should be somewhere else or not. And in learning a little bit more about that, I think it's clear that there are actually other ways to be able to get that work done within our student services budget that aren't necessarily normally in a guidance counselor FTE. And so we're paying attention to that. The intent is not for schools to lose important services, but to make sure we're providing equitable access to all schools. So if Bridport is a school of 45K to 5 students, and And we have another school that like Shoreham that is slated to be not that much bigger than that. What is comparable between them in terms of guidance counselor time, and how are we making sure that those things are shared? So as I said, that's a calibration that happens in Addison Central, I understand from time to time, but it hasn't in a while. And so this is a return to that practice. The principals this spring will sort those things out exactly, because what we propose and what happens when you apply common sense, right? Those are different, and so they'll work that out, as the spring comes along. Linda, go ahead and let me know what your comment is.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think, from a budget, when you look at the numbers and you look at like the smaller schools versus Mary Hogan, and then it's about the same number of students and the same number, right? The same number of counselors and nurses and all that. And so when you look at that, it can feel equitable. And in practice, I think for me, thinking about my daughter truly having equal access. So students at Mary Hogan have access to counselors and nurses 5 days a week, and the smaller schools don't have that same access. And so that doesn't feel equitable. And so I will be really interested on how those other supports and how kind of the whole picture of social emotional and guidance supports students will receive with that reduction in time. It almost feels like, right, like our students are going to have to kind of schedule their crisis when their counselor is available, and that doesn't feel great. And yeah, so that's just right. And there's also reduction of other staff at Bridport. And right, I think in general, when you have a reduction of staff, that just adds more work and more pressure to the people there. And so that's a concern.
Thank you for that. One thing that your comment prompts me to share is that one of the things that is helpful about having instructional specialists on the ground. Bridport, for example, will have one full-time instructionalist that's assigned there for the year, so that even though they're losing a classroom teacher position because their enrollment is lower, they'll have another adult in the building that's there who will also pick up recess duty and all of those other things that go along with being part of the school community. And my guess is that a place that is working through some of the things that Bridport may actually see an increase in staff once we allocate the student services side of the equation, which is usually not done until April. So special educators, mental health clinicians, academic interventionists, things like that provide adults. The Bridport is not slated to have any reductions in any of those areas. Really, the only reductions that Bridport is expected to see in this budget is guidance counselor, and we have lots of time between now and the beginning of school to really problem solve what does that look like, and how can we best support students. And also the one classroom teacher, which is replaced by the instructional specialist FTE, if that makes sense. So I appreciate your comments, and I hear what you're saying in terms of what the experience that you want to make sure that your child has, and that you're worried they won't be able to have, and that's important. So thanks for that. Okay, so we're gonna move on, beg your patience, and move back to the chat here. Try and take them in order. So Chris, could you say in a little more detail what the main sources were for the budget reductions that led to the tax decreases? Was it the 9.2 FTE reduction? And if so, could you say a little bit more about what those positions reduced were? Yes. So as it worked out, it was about probably half and half. The FTEs that we reduced represented about half of the money that we were able to present to the board to do without. The other half came from a number of non-personnel lines. Some of them were contingencies, like we reduced some construction fund contingencies, which had been carried forward. Some other pieces related to some of the operational tech lines, didn't need to be quite where they were. There were, some ways in which, we were able to restructure our planning for health insurance that allowed us some flexibility there, and so on. There were a number of reductions, some of them only a few $1,000s, and some of them larger that really helped us put together, the other half of the money that we suggested to the board that we could leave out of this spending plan. And in terms of the position reductions, you'll see in the board presentation that's on our website, there's 30.6 reductions overall, sunsetting positions, if you will. Some of those related to ESSER grants, some of them related to a change in direction, some of them related to enrollment, some of them related to the idea that, okay, there've been other ways of doing things now, and so we can shift a resource in a different direction. And there are I think 21 ish new positions that are created. I don't have that slide in front of me, and I hate to say the wrong thing, but those represent the $2.2 million of reinvestments in there. The difference is the 9.4, I think it is at this point. And mostly what we're doing without is a behavior consultant that actually works across the smaller schools, and those are I think we can manage those needs a different way. The smaller school principals and I have begun that conversation, and I think, again, through the student services allocations, we can get closer to that in a way that's more financially efficient. And also the ESSER positions we're reducing, for interventionists that related specifically to that era, an Aspire coordinator, the assistant superintendent's position we've reduced. There's alternative ed administrator. So some of those types of things, and you can kind of see the balance. And we worried less about trading one position for another and more about only bringing things back into our system that we knew we needed, and not bringing back in more than we knew we needed. And that resulted in that net reduction. So that's what that looks like. Okay. Any follow-ups to that, Chris?
I guess, can you just say, I want to give other people a chance, but I'm just curious what the approach on the behavior, really top line, if there's anything you can say about that.
Yeah, we have had what are now called behavior specialist and behavior consultant positions prior to COVID coming. And then in the pandemic period, those were increased for reasons that are generally well understood by the public. And I think now we're getting to that place where we can begin to taper that back. Those are conversations that are probably most alive within our district at the moment. And we all share a commitment to making sure that we do put resources in strengthening our first instruction, but we make sure we're also holding some of the real challenges that haven't quite left us yet. So we're trying to strike that correct balance. And so the first proposal we've put to the board has two of those positions reduced. And we'll see kind of how our feelings are about that as the week continues on, and we're just having good conversations and listening now that our whole system can be part of that, which is tricky to do before the board's first look. So thanks for the follow-up. Okay, so we have another question here. Leanne, I'm going to do my best. Okay, so you're referencing Nicole's presentation to the board about behavioral data, unsustainably high number of behavior incidents across all schools, more concerningly, disproportionately Mary Hogan, yeah, okay, Cornwall, Shoreham. I'm skimming in the sake of time, not because I'm not interested in all of the aspects of your question here. First, does general public have access to continued data? And what do the trends indicate now that more time has passed? So let me just address that one briefly. The public does not have access to obviously, data that relates specifically to student specific information. However, in the board strategic plan, there is a strategy that we need to be attending to that puts together ways in which we can reflect publicly about what's happening with the way students are responding to our system and the way we're responding to students. So part of this budget includes actually an expansion of the role that Mike Dudak has worked with the Mary Hogan staff to kind of invent around a student response coordinator into all three Middlebury schools in the hopes that that role can work with our smaller schools as well to develop that data system, what it needs to entail, what it looks like, particularly so that we're having an eye on the degree to which our historically marginalized communities are disaffected by our system, if that's something that we need to be paying attention to. So part of what the spending plan entails by the addition of those three positions and the change in Nicole Carter's former position to two roles rather than three in our student services department, just two. One being around special education, but the other being a director of equity, inclusion, and restorative practice, which will hopefully lead that work so that we all have a careful eye on what's happening, where is it happening, and what are we doing about that in that particular area, just like we do in academics, So that's work ahead of us and work that this spending plan gives us the ability to move forward meaningfully in. So thanks for that. I think, let me just make sure there's not given this data, how does the budget propose to reduce 4 para-educators and 2 behavior? So, what I can say to add to my previous comment is that the para-educator positions that are reduced in this budget, which is 8.5 FTEs, those actually are 4.5 at Mary Hogan and 4 at Moms, and those are historically unfilled. We're not able to fill those positions, it seems, regardless of what we've been able to do over a length of time. And so those positions are reduced and that those funds are part of what's reinvested in trying to create staffing patterns that will be supportive and also help advance us, which is ongoing work. We're presenting a plan that relates to our best thinking and our best experience so far, but this is something we're monitoring and measuring, as we move along, as we're clear about what are we hoping to see and are we seeing it and what do we need to do next. All right, so Leanne, any last follow-up to that?
I'm wondering about the staff that are on the ground supporting those students at Mary Hogan and that Mary Hogan, I'm more concerned about what feels disproportionate, right? Is like we have Mary Hogan was the only school across the district, including the middle and the high school, where the incidents were disproportionate to enrollment. And so cutting at Mary Hogan specifically, I was wondering what the thought process behind that was.
I don't know that Mary Hogan is losing anything actually. So we'll talk more about that together when we're face to face on Friday as a staff. But I also, it's also not necessarily true that that Mary Hogan is the only school that's experiencing things that are disproportionate to enrollment. And I understand the data that you've put there, but I think, moms, we need to develop a system that is really helping us to get where we need to go in terms of being able to respond well. And so that's what we're trying to do with Mary Hogan as much in mind as anyone else. So
I guess I thought that was the EduClimber system. Like I thought that's what the district had been doing with the EduClimber data was creating a systemic way to look at all of the schools in the district.
That does, and I don't want to get too far into the staff weeds in the, in the community moment, right? But because we'll have time to talk about that afterwards. I think what's important about your question, to the community is that, we have containers that like data systems that we call EduClimber is one, that we're able to house data in, but we're not necessarily where we need to be in terms of collecting the right data at the right time, systemically making sense of it, utilizing it. We're not well staffed in that area. And so I think putting more staff on the ground that is able to ensure we have those systems in place that can help us respond is part of this budget. And that, we'll talk more about in the coming days. All right, I'm going to move on. Adrian, thank you. Adrian, I think you're maybe on the same. Nope, that's not a question. Okay, Alicia, does each school get the same amount of funding per student across the district? That's an interesting question and not one that relates to how we've put together our budget in terms of thinking about equity of allocation, because not every school needs the same amount of funding. Depending upon the needs of the students in the building. So a lot of our funding is dedicated based on student need that relates to their various way of going about learning or the needs that they have, socially, emotionally, cognitively as they're arriving and what it will take to bring them forward as learners. But then also in this year, we are knowing that different communities need different academic supports. And so I would say the way we've thought about equity isn't equal, meaning, one school of 45 students gets the same allocation as another school of 45 students. We're looking at what are the needs of the students in those schools that relates to, in the budget presentations, blocks 5 and 7 in terms of student services and also targeted equity supports that are behind better academic performance. So in that way, our model is definitely not providing the same funding for everybody in that system. All right, any follow-up to that? Okay, I'm going to keep going here and Linda, I'm going to do a quick one here with class size. Will there be any classes that combine 3 grades? That depends actually on the board's decision on February 10th, I think, is the first board meeting in February regarding the class size policy revision that they proposed at the last meeting. If that proposal moves forward, then we would only have classes that combine 3 grades upon sort of superintendent exception. That's definitely not intended to be the rule. So if not, then that may not be a situation that we can avoid. And will there be any classes that fall below the minimum class size of 10? There are not scheduled to be classes that fall below the minimum class size of 10 right now. The policy that's under revision that's under consideration by the board currently allows for the superintendent to either allow, let's say, a class size that's close to 10 but not quite 10, or even more than the upper limit, as long as the educational programming isn't jeopardized. And that's probably a common sense approach to a policy like that. And so we'll see how those things resolve. All right, I'm going to keep going here in the interest of trying to get everybody. Adrian, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared off the top of my head to determine how much we're spending per student at Mary Hogan compared to the other elementary schools. but that's something that can be figured out. And so that's something I can have, our Matt Carente, do a little bit of follow-up work around. So thanks for the question. All right, other chat questions? Alicia, is there discussion happening to combine some of the smaller schools to both save significant funding and give students more access to services such as counselors or nurse? Funny you should ask. For those that follow along closely with board work, that the policy committee was charged by the board to take a look at the way our schools are configured and the ability of those schools to provide access to services, but particularly all of our curricular pieces. Sometimes when there's an unstable enrollment, maybe there's one kindergartner 1 year and 12 the next. And we're having a K or a K1 or a 1-2 or a 2 or a 2-3. There can be some curricular pieces that are missed. And I think that's something that we've taken very seriously, particularly as we're trying to make sure that all students have equal pathways to success. So the policy committee was charged with doing some thinking around what's important to consider about that as we move forward, perhaps in advance of the 26-27 academic year. I think they're finalizing some of their thinking around that in terms of what's important to look into, to get down to the bottom of what we could do systemically beyond what's possible in this particular budget that we're putting together right now for the short term. And I imagine the policy committee will be ready to share some thinking about that in February, and then we'll get busy operationally with whatever the board asks us to do in response to the policy committee's work. So that's probably a stay tuned. That's the best I can do with that. Thanks for the question. Is there a follow-up, Alicia?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. Mary Hogan getting another coordinator position. So the Mary Hogan, if you're talking about a student response coordinator, that is a position that's we've proposed to be added, intentionally, not temporarily or in kind of a pilot manner to Mary Hogan. They are also getting it's interesting that you say that, not an IB coordinator, but a curriculum coordinator. And let me make sure that I'm clear about the difference. Curriculum coordination in Vermont is part of our Title 16. It's part of what's required through the educational quality standards. Some of us who've been around a while remember when those were written. And it's a concept that's on the back of, kids can do well if they have a coordinated set of experiences over multiple years, particularly kids, who might be growing up in circumstances where they don't have a lot of educational resources at home, that they're drawing upon. So school is really where they need to draw from as they're preparing into being well-educated adults. So that curriculum coordination is something that we need to do. What I love about being at Addison Central is that, we do that well with a curriculum that develops kids' passions, teaches them to inquire, have units that tie together concepts of science and social studies and mathematics and literacy where appropriate in important ways. Our curriculum is one that is of very high quality. It is it's not necessarily something that maybe post-COVID prep programs for licensed teachers are really preparing people to be able to jump into right away. And it's one thing to build curriculum based on a set of activities or instructional materials or textbooks or things like that. It's another thing to build units and implement units from scratch that are really designed around a question and are leading kids through a question as they understand both concepts and skills in different areas that relate to that. That's pretty sophisticated work. I love that we do that. It is It's a curriculum that many kids, across the country, just simply don't have access to. But we really need to be supporting teachers well in the planning stages. By putting some additional coordination where we're planning to put it next year, the hope is that we can actually reduce teachers' time out of the classroom in trying to get together to do some of that work and provide better access for teachers who are thinking up, a way to go and need access to somebody right away about how to join in that thinking and move some materials forward. So Mary Hogan and MUMS, given that those are bigger schools, will have one full-time equivalent that supports that work, which is currently, also what the high school has. All right, so why is Mary Hogan? Okay, will they be able to do some extra duties? So I just want to, I think what I'm getting at from your question, and I hope when I'm finished with an answer, you'll tell me if I missed the mark, is that when the concept of curriculum coordinators was first introduced in Addison Central in the way we have them now, it related to bringing in our partnership with IB in using an external framework to begin to truly build a coordinated curriculum after the unification of the schools within Addison Central. And that was important work at that time. And I understand that there were all kinds of different hopes and dreams around that. And like anything, some of those are realized and some of those are not. We're in the middle of a NEASC accreditation and an IB reauthorization, and they're looking at the work that we've done over the last 5 years or so related to that. And our anticipation is that we now have good, stable resources and framework. And now we're ready to shift to make those things deeper and ensure that our implementation is consistent and rich and teachers are really well supported. That means that the curriculum coordination in some areas can shift from something that might feel like a pop-in model or a model where there are times when the curriculum coordinators are working with teachers and then times when people maybe aren't as sure what's happening in terms of what the impact is on the system, to a time when they're much more visible and accessible to be able to build on the ground work. Whenever somebody is assigned to a school, which in the case of Mary Hogan and MUMS, particularly is FTE around curriculum coordination, high school as well, and in the smaller schools with the instructional specialists, there is the common expectation that they're part of that community. So they need to get to know kids and be a trusted adult in the building, just like all the other trusted adults in the building. So the best way to do that is to be on lunch duty and recess duty and things like that. And so you can expect to see some of those shifts in that way too, that I think are helpful. Okay. So Connor, I'm seeing if D6 is approved and student families can elect to move to classes below 10 at another school. All right, so let me just clarify a little bit, Connor, and then feel free to let me know if I haven't. The D6 as it is right now says that elementary school classrooms should be at minimum 10. It's really all classrooms should be at minimum 10. Where that usually comes into play is in the elementary schools, particularly the smaller elementary schools. I think what you're referring to is a provision in the proposed revision of D6 that says if we have a circumstance where 10 cannot be reached in 2 grades, then there's an opportunity for other families in Addison Central that have students of the age of the class that's under enrolled by that standard to be able to elect into that class. There are also some parameters in that policy that say, okay, well, we can't create a class size problem somewhere else by solving one, in the school that's having that struggle. So that essentially is a protective guardrail that's in place. I think what you're asking is, could that prevent classes from becoming combined grades? I guess if a class, if a grade is 10, then it has the possibility of being a single grade, meaning if a first grade has 10 students, for example, this is coming up in Cornwall. Cornwall right now is projected to have fewer than 10 kindergartners. So right now, the thought is that, okay, if that's true, then we'll have a K1 in that situation. Enrollments shift and change. They go up and they go down, between now and the time where those decisions are finalized. So it's possible that in Cornwall, they might have 10, kindergartners. And if that's the case, they'll likely have a kindergarten and a first grade. So, so where we can have single grade experiences for kids, I think our teachers probably overall across our teaching force, feel more confident in trying to reach the high standards in each of the content areas in a single grade circumstance, rather than a multi-grade circumstance. That's not true across our district. We have teachers who really have spent a lot of time developing the multi-grade practice and would consider that a practice of choice. I have personally taught in both scenarios, and I understand the pros and cons of each. I think what's important to us, though, is that teachers have assignments that they feel they can be successful in as we reach financial feasibility and sustainability targets as well, which is important in a conversation across Vermont, So we're trying to put all those things together. The final part of your question says, how would that affect the budget if we hold steady staffing needs at small schools? It would essentially mean that we would be adding 5 FTEs for teaching back into the budget, which would mean, probably $600,000. So, that's a substantial change, and it might not be the right thing to do at this moment. Also, I'm not sure that not moving to a class size that is closer to 15, which is what both Mary Hogan and our smaller schools we're anticipating an average of next year with our staffing patterns is not going to be something that the legislature is going to require as we move ahead, because class size is one of the most significant drivers of financial feasibility across the state. And, I think they're going to be paying very close attention to that. So while we're not making that shift because of something we assume the legislature may or may not do, that's not an approach that we're taking. We're mindful of those things because I don't want to put the district in a position where we're chasing legislative mandates. If we kind of know what's coming and that also seems to work for our system, then that's important for us to understand and maybe pay attention to. So those are the things that we've thought about here. All right, moving on. How is the district planning to help support Mary Hogan's tremendous behavior needs next year with fewer teachers and staff? Mary Hogan is not slated to have fewer human beings, and that's probably something that will become clearer to staff, both tomorrow and as we keep going, in our conversations. I think because we've been really transparent about where all the dollars are spent. There's a difference between what's required and what the district normally invests to make sure that students and schools are stabilized. And much of that exists in Block 5. And those specific allocations in schools, have not been decided yet. Those really depend on the students that are coming in the buildings and what that looks like and what those needs are. And so those are conversations that happen more to the spring. And the principals obviously are very much drivers of those conversations, and obviously they work with their staff every day. They know what the buildings are like, and they're very good advocates, for the things that they feel like that they need. So that's to come, but it's not. Mary Hogan's not slated to have fewer humans, in the building, and that will become clearer as time goes on. All right. Other questions? And I appreciate the comments that people are also making and adding, and we will be able to collect those comments, and add them to the reflective material that we're getting, so that when we are deciding, what we're bringing to the board in terms of our final proposal that we'll be bringing on Monday, we're taking all those things into consideration. So even if you have thoughts that are not questions, which is what my focus is tonight, it's helpful that you're putting them in the chat. So I appreciate that. All right. Okay, let's see. Adrian, I'm gonna ask, maybe you and I can work in a more detailed way in the conversation questions that you have. At the end, or offline, because I think there's a lot that I could be explaining to you that I want to just put aside for the moment to make sure I'm getting to everybody. I'm not, I'm wanting to make sure to get all of your questions answered, but they're Mary Hogan specific, and I want to make sure that each of the communities are hearing what's important to them about all of their schools. So, all right. Let's see. Linda, yes. Yeah, so your comment really, I think, is connected to a question that I hear a lot, which is, you know, what are the ways that we will know how many resources are spent where and what that looks like, and the way in which each school is supported. There's been a lot more transparency, I guess is the right word, related to how our spending plan is developed this year than may have been released at this time in previous years. And so, and that transparency will continue, so that people are aware of what's there and what's not there and why, and how we're thinking about that, and what that looks like. So that will continue. Mary Heather, can you perhaps explain the distinction between Block 3 and Block 5 staffing? Yes. Approach to both things equitable. Yep. So, and this is their background materials around this for those that want to dive deeper, that on the website that the board has been following now for a couple months. So in our 7 blocks that are stacked one on top of the other to come up like a thermometer to the top of the spending limit that the board asked us to attend to in our draft, we have Block 1 that's operations, Block 2 that represents tuition, like the Career Center, preschool. Block 3 are our core requirements, and those relate to federal or state or board policy mandates, generally speaking, and how those have been interpreted. And that's where some of you have seen charts that are part of Matt's presentation that say, okay, there are this many classroom teachers in this school, this percentage of a world language FTE or a PE FTE, things like that. Those all relate to the school quality standards, as well as, federal requirements and board policy in terms of staffing. That's where the class size policy comes into play. So it's once we've met that, this is what that looks like. Block 4, I'm working my way up, is really around non-personnel items that affect sort of the general education classrooms, like supplies, things of that nature. Block 5 relates to student services, and those are typically related to students living with disabilities or needing access, assistance to the curriculum in one way or another. The typical supports or expenses you might find in Block 5 would be mental health supports related to, mental health diagnoses, either temporary, right, or more long-term, situational or long-term, learning needs related to disabilities, some academic intervention work that's related to either cognitive or emotional disabilities. Our behavior pieces are in that block. Block 6 relates to opportunities like field trips and, clubs, extracurricular activities, things of that nature. Extra FTE of music that we have that helps bring band and chorus to life in our schools, that's not technically required in schools that aren't giving a class credit for it, at the upper grades, but is something that this district has has opted to have, which is great. And then block 7 are targeted equity support. So that's where when we look at our student performance data and we see places where we need to accelerate what students are experiencing, because we have some students who need to make more than 1 year of growth in order to make good progress to getting to the standard so that we can reach the board's goal of 80% of students meeting the standard in math and literacy. That's where those are. So that's where our instructional specialists are. Curriculum coordination that is that might be related to ensuring we have strong math programs in place, things like that. That's where you'll find those pieces. After school programs that are academically oriented, there's some funding there, in hopes that we'll be able to bring some of those programs to Bridport and Shoreham, who are thinking together about a program that might work, that we could pilot to other schools as well. So those are where those supports live. And that's just a small walk through the blocks, for those that find that helpful. All right. Other questions? We are at 7:38. So maybe if there's a last question that people have, we can address that. And then, my email is pretty easy to find, and anyone is welcome to email thoughts or worries or appreciations or ideas, things like that are sparked, in the next 24 hours and thinking about this presentation. Those are all welcome. So that's a good follow-up as we're finalizing our plan and getting ready to come to the board again on Monday night. So we'll take one last question for tonight. Going once, going twice. This is what the classroom teachers call wait time. Or we give people time to think. Do I have one more question? What would that look like? Okay. Hearing none, what I want to do, now as we end is just thank you for your participation, for your good thinking, for, taking the time to be able to provide us with input and feedback at this stage, that we can connect with other pieces of feedback that we're getting across our system. And I, it's important, and we appreciate it. And it doesn't certainly have to stop here. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you to Emily for your savvy help behind the scenes, making sure that the evening goes smoothly tonight. And the next board meeting where this will be discussed in public session is Monday, the 13th. And that obviously people are more than welcome to attend, either virtually from our website or in person at the board meeting, so that you can be heard and understand everything that you need to understand prior to the finalization of our spending plan for the FY26 year. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night and wish everyone a wonderful rest of the evening.